Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of In the Kitchen with CCK. I am Coach Chef Kim and I am so glad that you guys have decided to come and join me in my kitchen. So if you know me in real life, you know that my heart, my passion, and my joy lies in bringing families back to the kitchen. It's why I do what I do. So one of the things I decided to do today was to shoot a recipe that is actually going to live inside of our brand new academy that is now live. The Teach Me How to Bake Whisk and Flour Academy is now open for families to join. If you are a beginning baker or if you're a mom and you want to help your kids learn how to bake, this academy is literally just for you. So inside of the academy, there is this really cute little kids class that teaches them the fundamentals of baking. And inside of that class, it directly aligns with the Teach Me How to Bake textbook that you can get on Amazon. I'll make sure that we link everything down below for you, but today we're gonna do one of the core memory recipes, chocolate chip cookies. Now, I scrubbed my website and I was looking for a basic chocolate chip cookie recipe and I didn't have one. So I had to shoot this and I shot the behind the scenes of me having to shoot the recipe first and then recording this show. So if you want to see the behind the scenes, I'll make sure it's linked at the end so you can take a look at what it really looks like to do what I do. But none of that is important. Right now, we're going to talk about how you get those kids in the kitchen. So first things first, any recipe that requires you to bring an egg to room temperature, I want you to take your eggs out. I want you to put them in a bowl of warm water. Then, while you are getting the rest of your ingredients, which is called mise en place, it's a French word, it means gathering everything you need. While you're getting your mise en place together and while you cream your butter and your sugars for these cookies, your eggs will have time to come to room temperature. Now, why did I put it in a bowl of warm water as opposed to leaving it out for 30, 45 minutes or 2 to 3 hours? Quite simple. You know how when you go to the grocery store, it says grade A eggs on it? Well, when you leave your eggs out, you decrease the grade of the egg. The longer they sit out, the more they decrease. Well, Chef Kim, what about eggs that never went into the refrigerator? What about farm eggs? Well, those are fine. They never went in the refrigerator. But once these eggs go into the refrigerator, you need to bring them back up to room temperature really quickly so that you don't cause any bacteria to be able to grow. So my egg has been sitting in the warm water for quite some time, so it is ready to go. In this recipe, it is going to tell you to use a stand mixer. If you don't have one, that's okay. You can use a hand mixer. I used a hand mixer when I shot the photos, so you will see that in the photos on the blog. Now, we're gonna use a paddle attachment. I do not use a whisk attachment when I'm doing cookies. It's gonna incorporate too much air, and the cookies aren't gonna come out the way I want them to. So, for this, we're gonna take our softened butter. All of my recipes start with unsalted butter. The reason for that is I'm putting salt in this recipe and I want to control how much is in there. So this is just half a stick of butter. And then I have half a cup of brown sugar and half a cup of granulated sugar. So we're gonna take these and we're gonna cream them. So what that means is literally, while we do this, we want to make sure that it becomes really, really creamy, okay? So I always start on low. That way nothing flies out when you're doing this. But this is gonna come together really, really quickly using this mixer. With your hand mixer, it's gonna take a little longer, so just pack your patience, okay? If you are working with kids, when you do this, number one, make sure they don't stick their hands inside the bowls. And then number two, you wanna make sure you're keeping an eye on what they're doing around you at the same time, okay? So at this point, we're almost there. I'm just gonna speed it up a little bit so that it becomes the consistency that I want. This looks good. So one of the things with creaming your butter and your sugar, if you take a little bit in your hands, it shouldn't feel really granulated, right? If it does feel really granulated, that means you did not cream it long enough and you should do it a little bit longer. All right. So now that we have that, we're going to do our egg. Now, before eggs became astronomical, I used to give the kids the eggs and let them crack them. Here's what I can tell you as a mom. If you're going to be cracking eggs with your kids in the kitchen, you want to make sure that while you're cracking the eggs, they crack them into a smaller bowl. Don't let the kids crack directly into your bowl. Crack into a smaller bowl. A couple of reasons. Number one, if there's an eggshell that goes into it, you can very easily get it back out. Just use the rest of the eggshell, dip it over in there, and then it's almost like a magnet. It's going to pull it towards it, and so you can get the eggshell out really quickly. Number two, if you happen to get a yolk that has some blood in it, you didn't throw that into your recipe, okay? So have your kids crack the eggs in a separate bowl. If you have more than one egg in the recipe and more than one kid, each kid gets to crack an egg, okay? So that's how we're dividing up the things we're doing in our kitchen. So I'm gonna pull this back down. We're gonna make sure we lock it in place. And we're gonna mix it until it comes together. Just like that. So using a stand mixer definitely gives you more power. You can get things done a whole lot faster. So this is good and ready to go. Now the last thing that we're going to put into this is going to be, I'm going to add my vanilla in just a second. We're going to measure out our flour and we're going to add in our salt and our baking soda. Now let's talk about the flour. For this recipe, we're using bread flour. And the recipe tells you to use 2 cups of bread flour. That's not like this. Don't do this and put that in. That's not what we're gonna do. That is more than 2 cups of flour, okay? So first things first, I'm gonna actually add my vanilla in. I'm just gonna do a little cap full. That should be plenty. And I am going to grab my spatula so I can scrape the bowl down. So scraping the bowl down is going to be really important for you. That way you can make sure that there's like no uncreamed butter and sugar that's in here. There's no extra things of, you know, like flour or something like that that doesn't get fully incorporated. You do not want to taste that in these cookies. That would not be delicious. All right, so to measure out my flour, I'm going to move this over just a bit. So to measure my flour, this is a 1 cup measuring cup. I'm going to take some flour out of here. It doesn't matter how much because this is not my measurement. This is my measurement. So I'm going to do it over my container. Actually, I'm going to do it over the sink. You do it over a container if you have a wider mouth than I do. Now you notice I'm tapping as I do this. That's to release any air bubbles that may be in this flour, okay? So then the next thing to do is just level her off. And now I have a cup of flour. When you just take a heaping cup of flour, it does not weigh the same. So if I were to tell you to do this in grams or in ounces, you wouldn't really be able to do it if you just grab a whole bunch and then just do it that way, right? So since we are not using our kitchen skill today, beautiful. We want to make sure that we have just enough flour in there. And now we do. So I'm going to set this aside. I'm going to add my other dry ingredients. This is my salt and my baking soda. And yes, I'm using baking soda instead of baking powder. The reason for that is I want my cookies to kind of flatten out just a little bit. So like this, they flatten out just a little, they don't stay puffy. That is gonna happen from our baking soda. So I'm gonna mix this together. You can use a fork, you can use a spoon, definitely do not use your fingers. And so now we're gonna add half of this into our batter. And then the other half we'll add once this is incorporated. Okay, so this has just come together. It's still really, really soft. I'm gonna add in the rest. Make sure you lock it. And then we're gonna bring this together. So I can see that my dough looks a little crumbly as we start. That's okay. Keep mixing it. It's gonna come together and create your dough. Beautiful. Now, what you don't wanna do is overmix this. Now, if you're wondering why did she use bread flour and not all-purpose flour, here's what I can tell you. Number one, you can use all-purpose flour for making cookies. It's totally fine. I would add just a tiny bit of cornstarch, maybe about half a teaspoon of cornstarch to your all-purpose flour. It's gonna give you a nicer chew. Your cookie will be a little bit softer. But when I was in culinary school, I only got 1 B. The entire time I was there, everything else was an A. While I was in culinary school, I got 1 B the entire time that I was in culinary school. I got a B on my cookie practical. Now, I am a person who went to culinary school quite literally so that I could start a cookie business. That's why I went to culinary school. And I got a B. That did something to my heart, my soul, and my spirit. And so I had this idea that if I made a cookie with all-purpose flour, it was going to be better than my professor telling me to do bread flour. Needless to say, when I got a B, after we had to create our cookie recipes, and the note was, you're supposed to be using bread flour so that you would have a softer bite. And so ever since then, my chocolate chip cookies have been done with bread flour. Okay, so we're gonna mix this in. I only did half of what I'm doing right now. I don't like to pour all of my chocolate chips in at one time. The reason for that is I want chocolate chips all the way throughout the dough. So if you add it slowly and then fold them in, so I'm folding and mashing, right? Folding and mashing, folding and mashing. That way I get chocolate chips all the way through, and then I just flip this over and notice this entire bottom side needs more. So there we go. So it's about 2 cups of chocolate chips. These are semi-sweet chocolate chips. I do love doing them with milk chocolate chips, but I didn't have any today. So semi-sweet it is. It's not a big deal. It's all good. So once we have our dough where we want it to be, then we can get ready to scoop our cookies. Now, you notice how when I was mixing, I did not mix for a really long time. The reason for that is I knew I did not want to have to chill this dough. If you over mix your dough, or if you make your butter too soft or something like that, you're gonna need to chill the dough. If it's really, really hot outside and you notice things are melting, like your butter looks a little soupy as you're like going, you're like, I need more flour. You don't need more flour. Just pop it in the fridge for about an hour, maybe 2, and let it chill. Once it chills, you will be able to use it, and then you'll be able to throw it into your preheated oven. So my oven is preheated to 350. We're going to scoop these out in even scoops using a cookie scooper, because yes, we're going to use our cookie scooper. We're going to put about 12 on at a time, and then we'll throw them into our preheated oven. Okay, so as you can see here, I have my parchment lined baking sheet. The reason I'm using parchment paper is so that I get a more even bake for my cookies, and that's a lot less cleanup for me. So I highly encourage you to use parchment paper whenever you're baking. We're gonna use our cookie scoop. I'm not gonna go overboard with this. I'm just filling it up and then scooping it out. It's just like ice cream, but it's just a bit smaller, right? So we're gonna get these cookies all lined up on here. We're gonna put them into our preheated oven that's preheated at 350 degrees. And these are gonna bake for 12 to 15 minutes. Depending on if you have a gas stove, an electric stove, if you are at high altitude or not, some things are actually going to mess with your baking times, which is why you get an estimate on recipes. So whenever you see 10 to 15 minutes or something like that, and you're like, well, is it 10 or is it 15? It depends, friend. It literally depends. It depends on the weather outside. It's like for today, for us, it's raining. So my recipe took a little bit longer than it did if it wasn't raining outside. That means it's more moisture in the air. I'm at a higher altitude here than I was in my home. It takes That actually makes it go a little bit quicker, and I have to watch things whenever I'm baking because I noticed that things are cooking a little differently in this stove. I also now have an electric stove, whereas before I had a gas stove. All of these things matter. So that is why you get the 10 to 15 minutes when baking. This one is going to be about 12 to 15. Just make sure you set an alarm and don't overcook these. So here's my tip for really beautiful chocolate chip cookies, okay? Or any cookie, honestly. Once you have them and you put them in the oven, they're going to brown around the edges before they do in the center. That is when you're going to pull them out. You're going to pull them out and they're not going to be done yet. The reason for it is the residual heat is going to continue baking it outside of the oven. That is how we get that really, really soft, ooey gooey cookie. That's how, slightly underbake your cookie. So these are going to go in the oven. I'm going to clean up and then we'll be back. All right, so let's take a look. Coming out, we've got a little bit of browning on the top. That is perfect. They look a little puffy right now. They will not stay that way. So I just took my second tray out of the oven. They're still hot. She's good. She's ready to go. They've been resting for maybe, I don't know, about 3 or 4 minutes. The recipe will tell you to let them rest for 5 minutes before moving them. One of the reasons for that is you want to make sure that when you go to move the cookies, they're not still too soft where they start breaking. So we're gonna move these over here. If you are someone like me where you can't wait until the cookies cool fully and you want to eat them, I'm not gonna tell on you. I promise. I'm not gonna tell anybody that you decided to partake in a beautifully wonderful, crispy, soft and chewy and delicious chocolate chip cookie. That's our secret, baby. I ain't gonna tell nobody. So we're gonna finish moving these over. And this really gave you a baker's dozen. So this recipe yielded 24 regular size cookies and one pretty large one. Technically, it could have just yielded 26 cookies, so that you do get a baker's dozen. You get 13 cookies per sheet, right? So now that we have our cookies out, we're gonna let them cool for a second. I wanna give you just a little tip, right? So if you are in the kitchen working with your kids and you wanna invite them in, number one, invite your children into the space with you, right? So inviting them in to do something like a really basic, really simple chocolate chip cookie is a great way to introduce them to the kitchen. It's a great way to introduce them to understanding why things are doing the things that they're doing. There's definitely resources for you on teachmehowtobake.com that will talk about what happened to our cookies. Like, our cookie was really puffy when it went in, and then it got a little flatter when we took it out. Why did it do that? We have an entire thing about your cookies, why they crumble, why they flatten, why they puff, right? It depends on the ingredients. It depends on how much air you put into it. And now you can have that intelligent conversation with your children, and your kids are gonna think you are the coolest parent ever, trust me. Another thing I can tell you about this, during my time as a chef instructor where I was teaching kids in the kitchen, I was literally in the kitchen with other people's children 5 out of 7 days a week, and it was the highlights of my life at that season in my life. Here's why. Kids love to talk, right? So whenever we were in the kitchen, I could not wait until I saw these kids every week so that I could learn the drama that's happening in the 4th grade science class. There was always something going on, and kids love to tell you this information when they are engaging with you, using their hands, using their senses, tasting the things that we're doing, right? Chocolate chip cookies are really easy. Number one, no, I don't let the kids lick the batter. There's raw eggs in it, so no, not gonna do that. We do have an edible cookie dough recipe on the site, and I'll make sure we link that down below. If your kid is gonna wanna put things in their mouth, then you can use that, right? Another piece of this is let them taste the ingredients as they go. So understanding the difference between the brown sugar and the granulated sugar, like let them pinch off a little bit to taste that, to see the difference between the two. And then ask them words to describe it. What does this taste like, right? What does it feel like when you rub it between your fingers? Making sure we're cracking the eggs inside of a smaller bowl. This teaches them cleanliness. It teaches them to go wash their hands immediately afterwards. And then we can keep going with our recipe as we do things. Also, make sure you print out recipes. If you know you're going to be with your kids in the kitchen, my favorite thing to do with that is going to be take your recipe once you print it out, put it inside of a sheet protector, like the plastic sheet protectors we put in notebooks in school. Put your recipe inside of that. That way, if something spills on it, you can very easily wipe it off, right? So while all these things sound like common sense, they're really not. Most people don't do that. The reason I did it is because I would be in the kitchen with 25 kids, and I can't yell at your kid because somebody dropped the egg on the recipe, or because somebody knocked over the milk, or somebody did something else, right? So we put these things into order in the kitchen so that it's a kid-friendly working space. The kitchen is like a science room, right? This is the space they come to learn how to do things, and you have to set that up in advance in order for this to work out well for your kids. So they can have all these things, they can taste the cookie, they are going to be so excited about the thing that they got to create. But let me tell you what else will happen. You are now creating a core memory with your child. There are hundreds of children around the United States who have had the opportunity to be in the kitchen with me. And I know for a fact, because not only have these children told me, who are now off in college, but their parents have told me how much they enjoy being in the kitchen with me. It's not that I'm nice all the time. I'm actually a very stern chef in the kitchen, because if not, kids can get hurt, right? But what I am is warm, welcoming, and I delight in the presence of other people's children and mine, particularly when we're in the kitchen. So if you want more tips on how to bring your family to the kitchen, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to this YouTube channel. I'll meet you back here next Friday for our next episode of In the Kitchen with CCK. Have a great weekend.